The room went dead silent the moment Alara Whitlock spoke his name. Darian Voss didn't do favors. He didn't take meetings with nobodies. And he sure as hell didn't entertain farm girls who wandered into the Obsidian Hall thinking courage was enough currency to survive. But Alara had just called him out, in front of every power broker, schemer, and social vulture in Ashford's elite circle. A public challenge, a death sentence wrapped in silk words. And the worst part? He was smiling. If you want to see how a nobody survives the most dangerous game in the capital, stick around until the end. Drop a like and tell me what city you're watching from. The chandelier above the Obsidian Hall was ridiculous. Alara had thought that the first time she'd seen it 3 weeks ago, and she thought it now, standing beneath its 1,000 glittering crystals, while 200 pairs of eyes carved her apart piece by piece. It was the kind of chandelier that cost more than her entire village made in a year, maybe 5 years. The kind of thing that existed just to remind people like her that they didn't belong. She'd worn her best dress tonight, deep green velvet she'd bought secondhand from a shop near the docks. The seamstress had assured her it was appropriate for a formal gathering. What the seamstress hadn't mentioned was that appropriate and acceptable were two very different things in Ashford's upper circles. The other women wore silk that probably cost a small fortune per yard, cut in styles Alara didn't have names for, accessorized with jewelry that caught the light like tiny trapped stars. They moved through the hall with the fluid confidence of people who'd been taught since birth that the world would bend to accommodate them. Alara moved like someone trying not to trip on marble floors she still wasn't used to walking on. She actually came. The voice came from somewhere to her left, a young woman with copper-colored hair and a smile sharp enough to draw blood. Alara didn't know her name, didn't need to. She'd learned quickly that in Ashford, the people worth knowing made sure you knew who they were. Everyone else was just noise. "I heard she wore that same dress last week," another voice added, slightly louder. Intentionally louder. Alara kept her eyes forward and her spine straight. The trick to surviving these events, she'd discovered, was to pretend you couldn't hear the knives sliding between your ribs. She'd been in Ashford for exactly 23 days. 23 days since she'd left the northern farmlands with everything she owned, packed into 2 leather cases and a head full of her uncle's warnings. "The capital will eat you alive, girl. You've got sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, but that won't mean a damn thing to people who've spent their whole lives learning how to smile while they gut you." He'd been right about most of it. What he hadn't prepared her for was how exhausting it was. Not the work. Alara had been working since she could walk. Not the hours. She'd pulled longer days during harvest season. It was the constant performance, the endless calculation of every word, every gesture, every expression. One wrong move and you were marked. One sign of weakness and they'd circle like wolves. She'd made her first mistake on day 2, asking a genuine question during a dinner party. Her second mistake, answering honestly when someone asked about her background. Her third mistake, believing that competence and effort would be enough to earn respect. By the end of week 1, she'd been labeled. That farm girl. The one who doesn't know how things work. By week 2, the whispers had started. Did you hear her accent? Did you see what she wore? Did she really think she could just walk into our world and fit in? By week 3, the whispers had turned into sport. And tonight was supposed to be her chance to prove them wrong. Alara's sponsor, a distant cousin who worked in textile imports, had secured her an invitation to the quarterly reception. "Just keep your head down," he'd advised. "Smile, nod, don't offer opinions. Let them get used to seeing your face, and eventually they'll stop noticing you're different." She'd planned to follow that advice. She really had. But then Cassian Holt had decided to make her the evening's entertainment. Alara spotted him now, holding court near the west-facing windows, surrounded by his usual circle of followers. Cassian was everything Ashford's elite valued. Old money, old family, old connections that stretched back generations. He had the kind of face that belonged on ancient coins, handsome in a way that suggested centuries of careful breeding, and the kind of cruelty that came from never once being told no. He'd targeted her the moment she'd arrived. "Alara Whitlock," he'd said, his voice carrying across the hall with practiced projection. "The girl from, where was it again? Millbrook? Thornhaven?" "Grayfield," she'd replied, keeping her tone neutral. "Grayfield? Of course. Tell me, how are you finding our little capital? Must be quite different from, what did your family do again? Farming? The conversations around them had quieted. Not obviously, these people were too well trained for that, but the quality of the noise had changed. People were listening while pretending not to. My family raised livestock and grain, Ilara had said. And yes, Ashford is different, louder, faster. More people packed into less space than seems reasonable. Someone had laughed. A sharp, unkind sound. Cassian had smiled. How charmingly rustic. And what brings you to our unreasonably packed city? This was the part where she was supposed to say something self-deprecating, make a joke at her own expense, give them permission to look down on her while pretending it was all in good fun. Instead, Ilara had met his eyes and said, "Opportunity, same as anyone else." The temperature in the conversation had dropped by several degrees. "Opportunity," Cassian had repeated, drawing the word out like he was tasting something strange. "I see. And have you found it? Opportunity, I mean. I'm working on it." Working. Yes, I suppose that's what people like you do, isn't it? Work. He'd made it sound vaguely distasteful, like discussing something unpleasant found on the bottom of a shoe. The rest of us, we simply are. More laughter from his circle, louder this time. And that's when Cassian had laid his trap. "You know what I think?" he'd said, his voice taking on a tone of exaggerated thoughtfulness. "I think our dear Ilara needs a proper introduction to how things work in Ashford. Not the working version, the real version." He'd gestured broadly at the room. "We have rules here, traditions, ways of doing things that go back generations. Perhaps if you understood them better, you'd have an easier time finding your place." Ilara's stomach had tightened. She could feel the shape of what was coming, even if she couldn't see the details yet. "Take, for example, the matter of connection," Cassian had continued. "In Ashford, success isn't really about what you know or how hard you work. It's about who you know, who vouches for you, who opens doors." He'd paused, letting his gaze sweep across his audience before returning to Ilara. "You could work yourself to death and get nowhere if you don't have the right connections. But with the right introduction, the right endorsement, well, everything becomes possible." "I'm aware of how networking functions," Ilara had said carefully. "Oh, I'm sure you are." "Theoretically. But understanding something in theory and navigating it in practice are very different things." Cassian had leaned in slightly, his smile widening. "So here's my proposal. A friendly gesture to help you find your footing. I'll facilitate an introduction for you, right here, right now, to someone truly influential. Someone whose attention could transform your prospects overnight." Every instinct Ilara possessed had screamed at her to decline, to thank him politely and extract herself from the conversation before whatever trap he was setting could spring shut. But she'd also known that declining would be taken as proof of exactly what they all believed, that she was too weak, too intimidated, too fundamentally unsuited for this world. "That's generous of you," she'd said, her voice steady despite the warning bells clanging in her head. "Isn't it?" Cassian had glanced at his companions, sharing some private amusement. "There's just one small thing. The person I'm thinking of, well, he's not exactly known for his warmth. Quite the opposite, actually, but his influence is undeniable. A word from him can make or break a career, a reputation, a life, really." "Who are you talking about?" Cassian's smile had turned razor sharp. "Darian Voss." The name had hit the conversation like a stone dropped into still water, ripples of reaction spreading outward. Ilara had heard it before, of course. Everyone in Ashford knew Darian Voss, at least by reputation. He was the man you didn't approach, the power broker who operated from the shadows, pulling strings and crushing rivals with methodical precision. He'd built an empire on information, leverage, and the kind of ruthless efficiency that left no room for sentiment or second chances. People feared him. People respected him. People absolutely did not walk up to him uninvited and ask for favors. Which was exactly what Cassian was suggesting. "Here's the game," Cassian had said, his voice carrying to everyone nearby, and based on the way conversations were dying across the hall, quite a few people who weren't nearby. "You approach Darian Voss, you introduce yourself, and you ask him, politely, of course, for his endorsement, his public support for your endeavors here in Ashford. And if I refuse, Alara had asked, then everyone here will know exactly what kind of person you are. Someone who talks about opportunity and ambition, but doesn't have the courage to actually pursue either when the stakes are real. Cassian had shrugged. Not a judgment, you understand, just an observation. Some people are built for this world, and some people aren't. The crowd had grown around them. Not obviously, again, too well trained for that, but Alara could feel the weight of attention pressing in from all sides. She'd looked across the hall to where Cassian was now pointing. Darian Voss stood near the far wall, partially separated from the main gathering by geography, and what seemed like sheer force of presence. He was tall, taller than most of the men in the room, with dark hair and features that might have been handsome if they weren't so cold. He wore black, because of course he did, cut to expensive perfection, but somehow making him look more dangerous rather than refined. He was in conversation with two older men, both of whom looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. So, Cassian had prompted, do you want to play? Or should we all stop pretending you belong here? Alara had felt the trap close around her like a fist. If she refused, she'd be marked as a coward, someone who couldn't back up her own words. She'd spend the rest of her time in Ashford, however long that lasted, being the cautionary tale about the farm girl who didn't know her limits. If she accepted, well, best case scenario, Darian Voss ignored her completely, and she'd be humiliated in front of everyone. Worst case scenario, he took offense at her presumption and made sure she never worked anywhere respectable in this city again. Both options were designed to destroy her. Cassian knew it. Everyone watching knew it. The smart move was to decline gracefully and leave. Cut her losses, go back north, admit that her uncle had been right, and Ashford was never going to accept someone like her. Alara had looked at Cassian's smug face, at the circle of people waiting to watch her fail, at the glittering chandelier that cost more than her entire life. Fine, she'd said. I'll do it. The crowd's reaction had been immediate, a collective intake of breath followed by excited murmuring. Cassian's smile had turned triumphant. Excellent. Oh, this should be entertaining. And now, 10 minutes later, Alara was walking across the obsidian hall toward Darian Voss while what felt like every person in the room watched. Her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. Her hands wanted to shake, so she clasped them in front of her to keep them still. The green velvet dress that had seemed like a good choice this morning now felt like a costume, like she was a child playing dress-up in clothes that would never actually fit. Darian hadn't noticed her approach yet. He was still talking to the two older men, his posture relaxed but somehow conveying that he could end the conversation whenever he wanted. Alara's brain was screaming at her to turn around, to come up with an excuse, any excuse, and retreat before this got worse. But she could feel Cassian watching, could feel the weight of 200 gazes tracking her every step. She kept walking. One of the older men spotted her first. His eyes widened slightly, surprise and maybe a hint of alarm, before he said something quiet to Darian. Darian turned, and Alara got her first clear look at him up close. The cold assessment in his eyes was immediate and absolute. He looked at her the way someone might look at an unexpected interruption, with a mixture of irritation and curiosity about who would be stupid enough to interrupt him. Alara stopped at what she hoped was a respectful distance, close enough to speak without shouting, far enough to avoid invading his space. "Mr. Voss," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she'd expected. "My name is Alara Whitlock. I apologize for the intrusion, but I was hoping I could have a moment of your time." The two older men exchanged glances. One of them looked like he wanted to say something, maybe warn her, maybe laugh. But a tiny headshake from Darian kept him quiet. Darian studied her in silence for what felt like an hour, but was probably only a few seconds. "You're the girl from Greyfield," he said finally. Not a question. "Yes, sir." "And you've been in Ashford for less than a month." 23 days. 23 days, he repeated. His expression hadn't changed, still that cold, analytical stare that made her feel like he was calculating her net worth and finding it severely lacking. "And in those 23 days, someone convinced you that approaching me uninvited at a social gathering was a good idea." It wasn't a question, but Alara answered anyway. "Not convinced. Challenged." Something flickered in Darian's eyes. Interest, maybe. or the predatory focus of someone who'd just spotted something worth hunting. Challenged, he said. By whom? Alara hesitated. Pointing at Cassian would make her look weak, like she was trying to deflect blame, but lying seemed like an even worse option. Does it matter? She asked. Everything matters. But I'll ask you a different question. Why did you accept the challenge? Because refusing would have made me look weak. And approaching me doesn't? Probably. But at least this way I went down fighting instead of running away. One of the older men made a sound, half laugh, half cough. Darian's gaze never left Alara's face. Interesting philosophy. Suicidal, but interesting. He glanced past her, toward where Cassian was watching with barely concealed glee. I assume this is meant to be a public humiliation. You approach me. I reject you. And your reputation, such as it is, gets destroyed in front of everyone who matters. That appears to be the general structure, yes. And you decided to go through with it anyway. I didn't see a better option. Darian was quiet for another long moment. The two older men had stopped even pretending to be part of the conversation. They were watching like spectators at a sporting event, waiting to see which way this would go. You know what I do? Darian asked. I know you're influential. I know you have connections across most of Ashford's major industries. I know that people are afraid of you. Are you afraid of me? Alara met his eyes and told the truth. Terrified. For the first time since she'd approached him, Darian's expression shifted. Not a smile, nothing that warm, but something that might have been approval in someone less cold. At least you're honest. He straightened slightly, and Alara realized he'd been leaning against the wall. The change in posture made him even more imposing. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me exactly what you want, in your own words. No rehearsed speeches, no trying to flatter me, no games, just the truth. And then I'll decide whether to destroy your life right here and now, or give you something worth walking across this room for. The hall had gone almost completely silent. Even the musicians had stopped playing. Alara took a breath. I want a chance, she said. Not a guarantee. Not special treatment. Just a fair opportunity to prove I can survive in this city on my own merit instead of being shut out because I don't have the right family name or the right connections. And you think I can give you that? I think if you said I was worth paying attention to, people would at least give me a chance before deciding I'm not. And what would I get in return? Alara hadn't thought that far ahead. She scrambled for an answer that wouldn't sound completely ridiculous. I don't know, she admitted. I don't have money or connections to offer you. I don't have information you couldn't get better from a dozen other sources. The only thing I have is that I'm very good at working hard and I don't quit when things get difficult. Persistence, Darian said. That's what you're offering. Persistence and honesty. It's not much. No, it isn't. He looked at her for another long moment, then past her at the watching crowd, then back. But it's more than most people in this room would give me. He stepped away from the wall. The entire hall seemed to hold its breath. Darian moved closer to Alara, not threatening, but closing the distance enough that everyone watching would see it as significant. You want a chance, he said, his voice carrying across the sudden silence. Fine, you'll get one. Starting tomorrow, you'll report to my office at 8 in the morning. My assistant will give you an assignment. Complete it to my satisfaction, and we'll talk about what comes next. Fail, and we'll both forget this conversation ever happened. Alara stared at him. You're serious? I don't joke about business. 8 o'clock, Miss Whitlock. Don't be late. He turned back to the two older men, effectively dismissing her. Alara stood frozen for a heartbeat, trying to process what had just happened. Then she managed a stammered, "Thank you," and walked away before he could change his mind. The crowd parted for her like water. Every face she passed wore some variation of shock, confusion, or outrage. Somewhere in the distance, she caught a glimpse of Cassian's expression, pale and furious, before she pushed through the nearest door and into a side hallway. Her legs were shaking, her hands were shaking, everything was shaking. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. Darian Voss had agreed to give her a chance, which meant tomorrow morning, the real test would begin. The office of Darian Voss occupied the top floor of a building that had been designed to intimidate. Alara stood in the lobby at 7:45 the next morning, staring up at the marble columns and brass fixtures that screamed old money and older power. She'd barely slept. Every time she'd closed her eyes, she'd replayed the scene from the reception. Darian's cold assessment, the shock on Cassian's face, the weight of 200 people watching her either fail or somehow, impossibly, not fail. She'd also spent half the night trying to figure out what the catch was. Because there had to be a catch. People like Darian Voss didn't just hand out opportunities to complete strangers with nothing to offer in return. Especially not strangers who'd interrupted his conversations at social gatherings on a dare. Either he had some ulterior motive she hadn't figured out yet, or this was an elaborate setup designed to humiliate her even more thoroughly than Cassian's original plan. Either way, she'd decided around 3 in the morning that it didn't matter. She was here. She'd been given a chance, however suspicious the circumstances, and she'd be damned if she was going to waste it by being too paranoid to try. The elevator ride to the top floor took approximately forever. When the doors finally opened, Alara stepped into a reception area that managed to be both elegant and unwelcoming. Everything was done in shades of gray and black, with sharp lines and minimal decoration. A woman sat behind a desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of dark wood. "Alara Whitlock," Alara said, approaching the desk. "I have an 8 o'clock appointment." The woman, middle-aged, impeccably dressed, radiating the kind of efficient competence that suggested she could run a small country if properly motivated, looked up from her computer screen. "Miss Whitlock?" "Yes. Mr. Voss is expecting you." She stood and gestured toward a hallway. "Follow me, please." They walked down a corridor lined with what Alara assumed were expensive pieces of art, abstract paintings that probably cost more than most people's houses. The assistant stopped at a door near the end of the hall and knocked once. "Come in." The voice was unmistakably Darian's. The assistant opened the door and stepped aside. Alara walked into an office that was somehow even more intimidating than the building's exterior. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Ashford's skyline. The furniture was minimalist but clearly expensive. A desk sat near the windows, and behind it, Darian Voss stood reviewing what looked like a stack of reports. He glanced up as Alara entered. "On time," he said. "Good. Close the door." Alara did as instructed. The click of the latch sounded very loud in the quiet office. Darian set down the papers he'd been holding and moved around the desk to lean against its front edge. He studied her with the same cold assessment from the night before, the look of someone evaluating whether something might be useful or should be discarded. "Do you know why I agreed to help you last night?" he asked. "No, sir." "Neither do I." He said it flatly, like he was annoyed with himself. "You interrupted my conversation, made a ridiculous request based on what was clearly a trap set by someone trying to embarrass you, and offered me absolutely nothing of value in return. By every logical measure, I should have dismissed you immediately." Alara stayed quiet, unsure if she was supposed to respond. "But I didn't," Darian continued. "And now I'm left trying to figure out if that was instinct or stupidity." He crossed his arms. "Tell me something, Miss Whitlock. When Cassian Holt dared you to approach me, did you have any idea what you were walking into?" "I knew it was a trap." "And you did it anyway." "Like I said last night, the alternative was worse." Interesting calculation. Darian pushed off the desk and walked to the windows, looking out over the city. Most people in your position would have declined, left the reception, and found a quieter way to build their reputation, slow and steady, safe. I'm not most people. No. You're someone who makes dangerous choices when backed into a corner. He turned back to face her. "Which brings me to why you're here. I told you last night that I'd give you an assignment, something to test whether you're actually capable of the things you claim, or if you're just good at sounding confident in front of a crowd." "I'm ready." "Are you?" Darian moved back to his desk and picked up a thin folder. "Because what I'm about to ask you to do will be significantly more difficult than approaching me at a party. It will require discretion, intelligence, and the ability to navigate situations where most people would fail." He held out the folder. "If you succeed, we'll talk about next steps. If you fail, you'll leave Ashford quietly and we'll never speak again. Understood?" Alara took the folder. "Understood." "Open it." Inside were several pages of what looked like financial documents, investment records, transaction histories, property titles, names she didn't recognize, numbers that didn't immediately make sense. "What am I looking at?" she asked. "A problem," Darian said. "One of my business partners is being blackmailed. Someone has information about certain questionable transactions from several years ago. Not illegal, but embarrassing enough that public exposure would damage his reputation and, by extension, some of my own interests." "And you want me to find out who's behind the blackmail?" "No, I already know who it is. What I want is for you to retrieve the evidence they're using as leverage." Alara looked up from the folder. "How?" "That's for you to figure out. You said you wanted a chance to prove yourself on your own merit. This is it. The documents in that folder contain everything you need to know about the situation. The rest is up to you. And if I can't do it, then you weren't as capable as you claimed." Alara felt her pulse quicken. This was insane. She'd been in Ashford for less than a month. She didn't know the city, didn't have contacts, didn't have experience with this kind of work. But she also didn't have a choice. "How long do I have?" she asked. 72 hours, starting now. 72 hours to solve a problem that Darian's people presumably hadn't been able to solve themselves. 72 hours to prove she wasn't just talk. Alara closed the folder and met Darian's eyes. "I'll get it done." Something that might have been approval crossed Darian's face. Or maybe it was amusement at her overconfidence. Hard to tell. "We'll see," he said. "My assistant will give you a way to contact me when you have results. Don't call unless you actually have something worth reporting. And Miss Whitlock?" "Yes?" "If you fail, don't come back here trying to make excuses. I don't have patience for failure or the people who try to justify it." "Understood." Alara left the office with the folder clutched against her chest and her mind already racing through possibilities. 72 hours. 3 days to either prove herself or lose everything. The game had started. And Alara Whitlock had never been good at losing. The first thing Alara did after leaving Darian's office was find somewhere she could think without being watched. That turned out to be harder than expected. Ashford didn't have quiet corners the way Grayfield did. Back home, if you needed space to work through a problem, you could walk out to the north fields or sit by the river and just breathe. Here, every inch of space was claimed by someone. Every cafe had customers. Every park bench had people watching other people. Privacy was a luxury reserved for those who could afford walls thick enough to keep the world out. Alara ended up in a public library on the edge of the financial district. 3rd floor, back corner, surrounded by books nobody had touched in probably a decade. She spread the contents of Darian's folder across a table and started reading. The target's name was Marcus Heilman, mid-50s, self-made fortune in shipping logistics, married with 2 children at university. On paper, he looked legitimate. Successful businessman, charitable donations, no obvious scandals. But the documents Darian had provided told a different story. 7 years ago, Marcus had been involved in a series of transactions that weren't quite illegal, but definitely weren't ethical. Moving goods through ports with questionable inspection records, partnerships with companies that had ties to less than reputable operations overseas. Nothing concrete enough to bring charges, but damaging enough that if the right journalist got hold of the details, Marcus's reputation would be finished. Someone had those details now. Someone who'd sent Marcus a very polite letter 3 weeks ago explaining that certain records had come into their possession and perhaps Marcus would be interested in ensuring those records stayed private. The blackmail amount was substantial, but not impossible. The real damage wasn't the money. It was the threat of exposure hanging over everything Marcus did. Alara flipped through the pages again, looking for patterns. The blackmailer had been smart. They hadn't demanded a single large payment that might trigger investigation. Instead, they'd structured it as ongoing installments, small enough to be written off as legitimate business expenses, large enough that over time they'd add up to a fortune. The first payment had been made 2 weeks ago. The second was due in 5 days. According to Darian's notes, the evidence was being held in physical form, documents, not digital copies. The blackmailer was old school, which meant they understood that anything digital could be traced, copied, or hacked. Physical documents, on the other hand, had to be found before they could be destroyed. What Darian hadn't included was any information about who the blackmailer actually was or where they might be keeping the evidence, which meant Alara was starting from nothing. She spent the next 6 hours in that library, reading through everything in the folder until she'd memorized every detail. Then she started making connections. The blackmailer had to have access to records from 7 years ago. That meant either they'd been involved in the original transactions, had worked for one of the companies Marcus dealt with, or had access to archives most people wouldn't even know existed. The letter itself, Alara studied the photocopy Darian had included, was professionally written but not formal enough to suggest a lawyer. The language was educated but casual. Someone comfortable with money, but not part of the elite circles Marcus moved in. By the time the library closed at 8, Alara had a theory and absolutely no proof. She walked back to the boarding house where she'd been staying since arriving in Ashford. Cheap, clean enough, populated mostly by other newcomers who kept to themselves. Her room was barely large enough for a bed and a desk, but it had a lock on the door, and that was all that mattered. She lay awake most of the night, turning the problem over in her mind. 72 hours. She'd already burned through 12 of them just reading and thinking. By morning, she'd made a decision that was either brilliant or suicidal, and she wouldn't know which until it was too late to matter. The next day, Alara went to see Marcus Heilmann's wife. Getting access to Catherine Heilmann turned out to be easier than expected. The woman maintained a public calendar for her charity work, fundraisers, galas, volunteer events. Alara simply showed up at a morning planning session for an upcoming benefit auction and introduced herself as a new resident interested in getting involved with local causes. Catherine was gracious, welcoming, and clearly desperate for help. "We're always looking for volunteers," she said, offering Alara tea and a sitting room that probably cost more than Alara's entire education. "Especially people with fresh perspectives. So many of our regular contributors have been doing this for years. They're wonderful, of course, but sometimes we fall into patterns without realizing it." Alara had spent the walkover rehearsing what she'd say, how she'd steer the conversation toward Marcus without being obvious about it. But as Catherine talked about the upcoming auction, a fundraiser for literacy programs in Ashford's poorer districts, Alara realized she didn't need to steer anything. Catherine was already there. "Marcus usually helps with the financial planning," Catherine said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "He's so good with numbers, but lately he's been distracted. Work pressures, I suppose. It happens." "Must be difficult," Alara said carefully, "balancing everything." "Oh, you have no idea." Catherine set down her teacup with slightly more force than necessary. "Sometimes I think he forgets I can tell when something's wrong. We've been married 26 years. You don't spend that long with someone without learning to read the signs." Alara took a chance. "Is he in trouble?" Catherine's expression shifted. Surprise, then something harder. "What makes you ask that?" "Because you look like someone who's been trying to fix a problem she's not supposed to know about." For a long moment, Catherine just stared at her. Then she laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Are all people from the north this direct? In my experience, dancing around problems just makes them worse." Catherine was quiet, studying Alara with newfound interest. "Who are you, really? You didn't come here because you care about literacy programs." "No," Alara admitted. "I came because I think I might be able to help with whatever's weighing on your husband." "And why would you do that?" "Because someone I can't afford to disappoint asked me to." Catherine's eyes narrowed. "Darian Voss." It wasn't a question. Alara nodded. "I should ask you to leave," Catherine said. "I should call security and have you removed from my home for presuming to involve yourself in my family's private matters." "But you won't." "No, because whatever you think you can do, I've already tried and failed." Catherine stood and walked to the window overlooking an immaculate garden. "Someone is blackmailing my husband. They have evidence of transactions from years ago. Before we were as established as we are now, before he understood how carefully you have to move in this city. The things he did weren't illegal, but they'd destroy everything we've built if they became public." "Do you know who's behind it?" "No, Marcus won't tell me. He says the less I know, the safer I am." Catherine turned back to face Alara. "But I'm not stupid. I've noticed the withdrawals, the late-night phone calls he takes in his study, the way he flinches every time the mail arrives. Has he considered going to the authorities?" And say what? That someone has embarrassing information about questionable business deals from his past? The moment he reports it, those details become part of a public investigation. The blackmail works because the threat of exposure is worse than the payments. Alara thought about this. What if the evidence disappeared? Then whoever has it would just claim they have copies. We'd be right back where we started, only now we'd have made an enemy by trying to fight back. Unless you could prove there were no copies. Catherine studied her. You have a plan. The beginning of one. And you think Darian Voss can help? I think he expects me to handle it myself. This is a test. A test? Catherine's laugh was harsh. He's using my husband's crisis as a test for some girl he just met? Yes? And you're going along with it? I don't have much choice. Same as you. Catherine was quiet for a long moment. Then she crossed back to where Alara sat and lowered herself into the chair across from her. All right, she said. What do you need? What Alara needed was access to Marcus's records, specifically the correspondence with the blackmailer. Catherine provided it without hesitation, disappearing into her husband's study and returning with a locked box she'd apparently known about all along. He thinks I don't know where he keeps things, Catherine said, setting the box on the table between them. Men are predictable that way. Inside were 3 letters, all written in the same casual professional tone. No names, no signatures, just instructions for payment transfers and polite reminders about what would happen if Marcus failed to comply. But there was something else in the box. A business card. Alara pulled it out. Plain white stock, black text. Archival Solutions and Estate Management. Victoria Cross, proprietor. Who is this? Alara asked. No idea. I found it tucked into the first letter's envelope. Marcus wouldn't tell me what it meant. Alara turned the card over. On the back, written in pen, Port District, Warehouse 47. Something clicked in her mind. I need to go, she said, standing. Catherine stood as well. Be careful. Whoever this is, they've already proven they're willing to destroy people to get what they want. I'll keep that in mind. And Alara? Catherine's voice stopped her at the door. If you manage to fix this, tell Darian Voss he's in my debt. I don't forget things like that. Alara nodded and left before Catherine could change her mind about helping. The Port District was exactly as rough as it sounded. Alara had walked through it once during her first week in Ashford, trying to get her bearings in the city. She'd been told very clearly by her boarding house landlady that going back would be stupid. She went back anyway. Warehouse 47 sat at the end of a row of similar buildings, all of them showing signs of long neglect. Broken windows, graffiti on the walls, the kind of place where people conducted business they didn't want recorded. The door was locked, but not well. Alara had grown up on a farm. She knew how to work a simple bolt mechanism with a piece of bent wire. Inside, the warehouse was mostly empty. Dusty floors, old shipping crates stacked against one wall, the smell of mold and rust. But in the back corner, someone had set up what looked like a makeshift office. Desk, filing cabinet, portable heater. And sitting at the desk, going through a stack of papers, was a woman in her 40s with sharp features and sharper eyes. She looked up as Alara entered. We're closed, the woman said. Are you Victoria Cross? Depends who's asking. Alara closed the distance between them, her heart hammering. This was the moment, the decision point. She could back out now, leave, tell Darian she couldn't find the evidence. Or she could jump off the cliff and hope she'd figured out how to fly on the way down. My name is Alara Whitlock. I'm here about Marcus Heilman. Victoria's expression didn't change, but her hand moved slightly closer to the desk drawer. Don't know anyone by that name. Sure you don't. Just like you don't know anything about blackmail or documents from 7 years ago, or payments being made to keep certain information private. You should leave. I'm not going anywhere until we talk. Victoria stood. She was taller than Alara, broader in the shoulders, and carrying herself like someone who knew how to handle threats. You're either brave or stupid. Haven't decided which yet. Probably both, Alara said. But here's the thing. You're smart. Smart enough to find records nobody else could access. Smart enough to structure this whole operation so it looks legitimate on paper. But you made one mistake. What mistake? You left a trail, that business card, the warehouse address. You wanted Marcus to know you were real, that you had infrastructure behind this. But infrastructure means vulnerabilities. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Who sent you? Heilman? Someone who wants this situation resolved quietly. Tell your someone that Heilman keeps paying, or the documents go public. Those are the terms. And if the documents disappeared? They won't. I've got copies in 3 separate locations. You'd never find them all. Alara had been expecting this. You're lying. Excuse me? You're lying about the copies. If you had multiple locations, you wouldn't be working out of this warehouse. You'd have a real office, real security. This whole operation is small scale because you're doing it alone. Victoria's jaw tightened. You don't know what you're talking about. I know you're good at research, but bad at scaling. I know you probably found those documents by accident. Maybe you used to work for one of the companies Marcus dealt with. Maybe you inherited records from someone else. But you're not a professional blackmailer. This is opportunistic. Doesn't make the evidence less real. No, Alara agreed, but it does make this negotiable. I'm not negotiating. Then you're going to lose everything. Alara pulled out her phone. She'd prepared for this part. See, the thing about Darian Voss is that he doesn't make empty threats. If I can't retrieve the evidence, he'll move to Plan B, which involves making your life extremely difficult in ways you probably haven't imagined yet. He doesn't scare me. He should, but here's what I'm offering instead. You give me the documents, all of them, right now. In exchange, I don't tell Darian where to find you. Victoria laughed. That's your offer? I give up my leverage and you don't sick a mob boss on me? Darian's not a mob boss. He's worse. Mob bosses are predictable. Darian is surgical. Still not interested. Alara had known this wouldn't be easy. She took a breath and played her last card. What if I could get you something better than blackmail money? Like what? A clean exit. I know someone who runs archival services, legitimate ones. They're always looking for people who understand old records and document management. It pays well, it's legal, and it gets you out of this warehouse. Why would you help me? Because if you disappear quietly, everyone wins. Marcus keeps his reputation, you get a real job, and I don't have to watch Darian destroy you piece by piece. Alara met Victoria's eyes. You're good at what you do. That's obvious. But you're not cut out for this kind of work. You don't have the stomach for it. You don't know anything about me. I know you've been sitting in this warehouse for weeks trying to convince yourself this is worth it. I know you probably justified it by telling yourself Marcus deserved it, that he'd done worse things and gotten away with them. But you can't sleep at night, can you? Because you're not actually a bad person. You're just someone who made a desperate choice, and now you're in too deep to see another way out. Victoria stared at her. You're insane. Maybe, but I'm also right. For a long, tense moment, neither of them moved. Then Victoria opened the desk drawer, not for a weapon, but for a folder. She tossed it onto the desk between them. Everything's in there, she said, her voice tight. Original documents, my notes, all of it. And you're right. There are no copies. I couldn't afford multiple secure locations even if I wanted them. Alara picked up the folder carefully, half expecting this to be a trap. The job offer, Victoria said. Is it real? I'll make some calls. Can't guarantee anything, but if you're as good as you seem, someone will hire you. Victoria nodded slowly. Tell Heilman I'm sorry. Tell him I know that doesn't fix anything, but I mean it. I'll tell him. Alara turned to leave, then stopped. One more thing. Why did you do it? Really? Victoria was quiet for a moment. My brother worked for one of those companies Marcus dealt with. He flagged the questionable transactions, tried to report them. He got fired for it, lost everything, died 3 years ago, still broke and bitter. She looked at Alara. I found his records after he passed, saw Marcus's name in them, and I just wanted someone to pay for what happened to him. I'm sorry. Yeah, me too. Alara left the warehouse with the folder clutched against her chest and the sick feeling that everything about this situation was wrong. She'd gotten what Darian wanted. She'd succeeded where presumably his own people had failed. But she'd also just destroyed a woman's only leverage and possibly ruined her life in the process. The walk back through the Port District felt longer than the walk in. By the time Alara reached safer streets, it was past midnight. She found a late-night cafe and ordered coffee she couldn't afford, sitting in a back booth while she went through Victoria's documents. Everything was there. Transaction records, shipping manifests, correspondence between Marcus and his questionable partners, enough to prove the blackmail threat had been real. Alara pulled out her phone and called the number Darian's assistant had given her. It rang twice before a familiar cold voice answered. "Do you have it?" "Yes." "Bring it to my office. Now." The line went dead. Alara finished her coffee, paid, and headed back into the night. Darian's building was mostly dark when she arrived, just security lights and a single illuminated window on the top floor. The lobby guard recognized her from earlier and waved her through without comment. The elevator ride felt like descending into deep water. When she reached Darian's office, the door was already open. He stood at the windows again, looking out over Ashford's sleeping cityscape. "Did anyone see you?" he asked without turning around. "No." "You're certain?" "Yes." "Good." He finally turned to face her. "Show me." Alara handed over the folder. Darian flipped through it quickly, his expression never changing. "This is everything," he said. Not a question. Victoria Cross confirmed there are no copies. She was working alone. Victoria Cross. Darian's mouth curved slightly. "You found her in under 48 hours. My people spent 2 weeks and got nowhere. I had an advantage. I didn't know it was supposed to be impossible. Ignorance is strategy. Interesting." He closed the folder. "You did well, Miss Whitlock." "I'm not sure I did." Darian's eyes sharpened. "Explain." "Victoria Cross isn't a criminal. She's someone who made a bad decision because she was hurting. I just took away her only leverage and left her with nothing. She was committing blackmail. Actions have consequences. I know that, but what? You feel guilty?" Darian set the folder on his desk. "Let me tell you something about guilt, Miss Whitlock. It's a luxury. People like Victoria Cross, people like Marcus Heilman, people like you and me, we don't get to indulge in guilt. We make choices, we live with them, and we move forward. That's how you survive." "Is that what you do? Just move forward without looking back?" "Every single day." He moved closer, studying her face. "You're wondering if I'm a good person, if working for me makes you complicit in things you're not comfortable with, if this is worth whatever you're trying to build here in Ashford." Alara didn't deny it. "Here's the truth," Darian said. "I'm not a good person. I'm effective. I solve problems other people can't solve, and I do it without apologizing or making excuses. If that bothers you, leave now. Walk away and find someone else to give you opportunities. And if I stay, then you accept that this world doesn't reward hesitation or moral hand-wringing. It rewards results." He gestured at the folder. "You got results, which means tomorrow we talk about what comes next." "What comes next?" "Your real test." Darian's smile was cold and sharp. "This was just the audition." Alara felt her stomach drop. "You're not serious." "I'm always serious. This assignment proved you can think on your feet and follow through when pressured, but it doesn't tell me if you can handle what I actually need." "Which is what?" "An alliance. One that will require you to be very visible, very public, and very close to me for the foreseeable future." He moved back to his desk, dismissing her. "Go home, Miss Whitlock. Get some sleep. Tomorrow, your real education begins." Alara wanted to argue, wanted to demand answers about what he meant by alliance, why he needed her specifically, what she was getting herself into. But exhaustion and the events of the past 48 hours were catching up to her. She nodded and turned to leave. "Miss Whitlock." She stopped at the door. "You did better than I expected," Darian said. "Don't let it go to your head. The real challenges haven't started yet." Alara walked out into the night with the sinking certainty that she'd just passed a test she should have failed, and the even worse certainty that whatever came next would be designed to break her completely. She made it back to her boarding house room just before dawn, fell onto the bed fully clothed, and slept for exactly 3 hours before her alarm dragged her back into consciousness. When she checked her phone, there was a message from Darian's assistant. "Meeting at 10 a.m. Formal attire. Don't be late." Elara stared at the ceiling and tried to remember why she'd thought coming to Ashford was a good idea. No answers came. She got up, got dressed, and prepared to find out exactly what kind of trap she'd just walked into, with her eyes wide open. The dress arrived at 9:30. Elara stared at the garment bag hanging on her door like it might contain something dangerous, which, given the circumstances, it probably did. She unzipped it slowly. Inside was a dress that cost more than 6 months of her rent. Deep midnight blue, structured but elegant, the kind of thing worn by women who belonged in Darian's world. A note was pinned to the hanger in handwriting she didn't recognize. "Wear this. You'll understand why later." Elara wanted to throw it back in his face, wanted to show up in her secondhand green velvet just to prove she didn't need his charity. But she also wasn't stupid. Whatever meeting was happening at 10 o'clock, appearance would matter. In Ashford, it always did. She put on the dress. It fit perfectly, which bothered her more than it should have. That meant Darian had somehow gotten her measurements without asking. Had probably known from the moment she'd walked into the obsidian hall exactly what size she wore, what colors would work, what style would make her look less like a farm girl playing dress-up. The control in that small detail made her skin crawl. She arrived at Darian's office at exactly 10 o'clock to find she wasn't the only person who'd been summoned. The reception area held 5 other people. 3 men in expensive suits, 1 woman in a dress that made Elara's look modest by comparison, and standing slightly apart from the others, Cassian Holt. He saw her at the same moment she saw him. His expression went through several rapid changes: surprise, recognition, something that might have been fear, then settling into cold fury. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice low enough that the others wouldn't hear but sharp enough to draw blood. "I could ask you the same thing." "I was invited. You're nobody." Apparently Darian disagrees. Before Cassian could respond, the door to the inner office opened. Darian's assistant appeared, her expression professionally neutral. "Mr. Voss will see you all now." The group filed in. Elara ended up near the back, which gave her a clear view of everyone's reactions when they entered the office and saw what had been set up. The furniture had been rearranged. Instead of Darian's usual desk and chairs configuration, the space now held a conference table with 6 chairs. At the head sat Darian, looking exactly as cold and calculating as always. Standing behind him was a man Elara didn't recognize, older, gray-haired, wearing glasses and carrying a leather portfolio. "Sit," Darian said. Everyone sat. Darian waited until they were settled before speaking. "You're all here because you have something I need. Connections, resources, influence in sectors I'm moving into. Some of you know why you were invited, some of you don't." His gaze swept across the table, landing on each person for exactly 1 second before moving on. "What none of you know is that I'm about to make an announcement that will change the structure of my operations significantly." The room went very quiet. "For the past 3 years," Darian continued, "I've been building toward a specific goal: consolidation of interests across shipping, real estate development, and financial services. To achieve that consolidation, I need something I don't currently have: legitimacy, the kind that comes from strategic alliances and public perception management." One of the men at the table, older, confident, leaned forward. "You're talking about a merger." "I'm talking about a partnership, one that requires very careful construction." Darian gestured to the gray-haired man behind him. "This is Richard Tremaine, my attorney. He spent the last 6 months putting together a framework for what I'm proposing. Richard, explain." Tremaine stepped forward, opening his portfolio. "What Mr. Voss is suggesting is a multi-party alliance structured around mutual benefit and shared risk. Each participant brings specific assets to the table. In exchange, each receives access to networks and opportunities they couldn't reach independently." "Sounds like a cartel," the woman in the expensive dress said flatly. "It's a consortium," Tremaine corrected, "perfectly legal, properly documented, and designed to benefit everyone involved." "And if we refuse?" This from one of the younger men, nervous energy radiating off him. "Then you leave this room and we never speak of this again," Darian said. "But you should know that the people at this table represent approximately 40% of Ashford's emerging power structure. If you walk away, you'll be on the outside of something significant." Cassian had been quiet until now. When he finally spoke, his voice was tight. Why is she here? Every eye turned to Alara. Miss Whitlock, Darian said, and something in his tone made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Is here because she represents an element this alliance has been missing. What element? Cassian demanded. She's nobody. She has no connections, no money, no influence. She showed up in this city a month ago with nothing. Exactly. Darian's gaze locked on Alara, and for a moment she couldn't look away. She's an outsider, someone with no ties to existing power structures, no debts owed to old families, no inherited obligations that might complicate her loyalty, which makes her the perfect neutral party for what I need. The room temperature seemed to drop by 10 degrees. And what exactly do you need? The older man asked slowly. Darian stood, moving around the table until he was directly beside Alara's chair. She forced herself not to flinch. I need someone who can represent my interests in social settings without triggering suspicion or territorial responses from existing players. Someone who can be trained, directed, and trusted to follow through on complex negotiations without letting personal ambition interfere. He put his hand on the back of Alara's chair, not touching her but close enough that everyone could see the implication. I need someone to become publicly associated with me in a way that signals stability, commitment, and long-term planning. Understanding hit Alara like cold water. No, she said. Excuse me? No. Whatever you're suggesting, the answer is no. Darian's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Perhaps we should discuss this privately. Perhaps you should have discussed it privately before dragging me into a room full of people and announcing plans I never agreed to. Cassian laughed, a harsh, delighted sound. She doesn't even know, does she? You didn't tell her what this meeting was actually about. Miss Whitlock understands enough, Darian said, his voice level but with an edge that suggested dangerous ground. I understand that you're trying to use me, Alara said, standing up. The chair scraped against the floor, loud in the sudden silence. I understand that everything from the moment I walked into that reception was a setup. The test, the assignment, this dress, all of it designed to put me in a position where I'd feel obligated to go along with whatever you wanted. You're being dramatic. Am I? Then tell me I'm wrong. Tell me you weren't planning to announce some kind of fake engagement or partnership that would make me look like your ally, or worse, your property, in front of everyone who matters in this city. The silence that followed was absolute. Tremaine cleared his throat. Perhaps I should... Stay, Darian said, not looking at him. His eyes were locked on Alara. You're right, that was the plan. Someone at the table gasped. Alara couldn't tell who. The political landscape in Ashford is shifting, Darian continued, still speaking only to her. The old families are losing ground to new money, and new money doesn't know how to play by established rules. That creates chaos. Unpredictability. I need to signal that I'm building something stable, something that goes beyond immediate profit and short-term dominance. A visible, public alliance with someone outside the existing power structures would do that. By making me look like your puppet. By making you look like my partner. There's a difference? Yes? One you'd understand if you'd let me explain. Explain then. Alara crossed her arms, ignoring the fact that everyone was staring. Explain why I should let you use me as a prop in whatever game you're playing. Darian was quiet for a moment, and Alara had the distinct impression he was recalculating on the fly. Because, he said finally, you want power. Real power, not the illusion of it. You want to stop being the outsider, the farm girl, the nobody everyone underestimates. This gives you that, instantly, permanently. At what cost? The cost of being associated with me, of accepting that some people will assume you slept your way into position, or manipulated me, or sold out whatever principles you think you're defending by refusing. And that doesn't bother you. Not remotely. What bothers me is wasted potential. Darian moved closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. You solved a problem in 2 days that my people couldn't solve in 2 weeks. You walked into a warehouse alone and convinced a blackmailer to give up her only leverage without violence or threats. You're smart, capable, and brave in ways most people in this room could never manage. And you're about to throw all of that away because you're offended that I didn't ask permission before seeing what you were actually worth. You're manipulating me right now. Of course I am, But that doesn't make it less true. Alara wanted to walk out, wanted to tell him exactly what he could do with his partnership and his power and his calculated manipulation disguised as opportunity. But she also knew, hated knowing, but knew that he was right about one thing. If she left now, she'd spend the rest of her life wondering what she could have built if she'd been brave enough to take the chance. She turned back to face the table. Everyone was still watching. Cassian looked like he wanted her dead. The others just looked confused. "If I agree," Alara said slowly, "we do this on equal terms. Not me as your representative, not me as your visible partner while you pull strings behind the scenes. Equal terms, equal voice, equal decision-making power." "That's not realistic," the older man said. "Then I walk." Darian studied her for a long moment. Then, impossibly, he smiled. It wasn't warm. Nothing about him was warm, but it was genuine. "Equal terms," he agreed, "with the understanding that you still have a lot to learn about how this world actually functions. I'm a fast learner." "You'd better be." Darian turned back to the table. "This alliance moves forward with Miss Whitlock as my announced partner in all social and political negotiations. Anyone who has a problem with that can leave now." Nobody moved. Cassian looked like he was going to be sick. "Good," Darian said. "Richard, distribute the contracts. Everyone has 48 hours to review terms before we finalize." Dismissed. The group filed out slowly. Alara stayed seated, trying to process what had just happened. She'd just agreed to tie herself to the most dangerous man in Ashford. Either she'd made the smartest decision of her life, or she'd just signed her own death warrant. The days that followed were a blur of contracts, meetings, and very expensive clothing Alara didn't ask for, but kept receiving. Darian had been serious about the equal partner arrangement, at least in public. He introduced her at gatherings, included her in conversations about business strategy, made sure everyone saw them together enough that speculation started immediately. The rumors were exactly as bad as he'd predicted. She's sleeping with him. She's using him for money. She's a gold digger who got lucky. He's using her to make someone else jealous. Alara learned to ignore it, mostly. What she couldn't ignore was the way Cassian's crowd escalated their attacks. It started small, whispered comments at events, pointed questions about her background, casual remarks designed to remind everyone that she didn't belong. Then it got worse. Someone leaked her boarding house address to a gossip publication. Alara came home one evening to find photographers camped outside shouting questions about her relationship with Darian. The landlady gave her notice the next day. "Nothing personal, dear, but I can't have this kind of attention on my property." Alara moved into a hotel. Darian offered to arrange something better, but she refused. Taking his money for clothes and appearance was one thing. Taking it for housing felt like crossing a line she couldn't uncross. Then someone started digging into her family back in Grayfield. The first article appeared in a tabloid nobody respectable read, but everyone heard about. Farm girl's desperate escape. The real reason. Alara Whitlock left home. It was full of lies, suggestions that she'd been involved in some scandal, that her family had been glad to see her go, that she'd come to Ashford running from debt or disgrace or both. None of it was true, but truth didn't matter. What mattered was that people started treating her differently. The cautious acceptance she'd been building disappeared overnight. Doors that had started to open slammed shut, and through it all, Darian remained coldly practical. "Ignore it," he said when she showed him the article. "It's noise. It's my reputation." "Your reputation is what I say it is. Anyone who matters knows that article is fabricated." "Do they? Because it doesn't feel that way. Then you're not paying attention to the right people." They were in his office, late evening, after another exhausting day of meetings and carefully managed public appearances. Alara was tired, bone-deep tired in a way that sleep wouldn't fix. "How do you do this?" she asked. "How do you live like this all the time? Always calculating, always performing, always 3 steps ahead of everyone?" "Practice." "That's not an answer." Darian looked up from the papers he'd been reviewing. "You want an honest answer?" "Yes. I don't think about it as performance. I think about it as survival. This city eats people who show weakness, so I don't show weakness." He set down his pen. "You're learning the same skill whether you realize it or not. Every time someone tries to break you and you refuse to break, that's survival. It doesn't feel like survival, it feels like drowning. Then swim harder. Is that what you did? When you were starting out? Something shifted in Darian's expression, there and gone in a heartbeat. I didn't have a choice, neither do you. Before Alara could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then stood abruptly. We need to go. Go where? The Merchants' Gala, it starts in an hour. I thought that was next week. It was. The schedule changed. We're expected to attend. Alara's stomach sank. The Merchants' Gala was one of the biggest social events of the season. Hundreds of people, press coverage, everyone who mattered in Ashford's business community. I'm not ready for that. You'll have to be. Darian was already moving toward the door. Cars waiting downstairs? We'll brief on the way. The gala was held in a historic mansion on the north side of the city, the kind of place that looked like it belonged in a different century. Crystal chandeliers, marble columns, waiters in formal attire carrying trays of champagne that probably cost more per glass than Alara used to make in a week. She and Darian arrived together, which meant they were photographed together. Dozens of cameras, flashing lights, questions shouted from behind velvet ropes. Miss Whitlock, how long have you and Mr. Voss been together? Alara, is it true you're engaged? Mr. Voss, what do you say to allegations about Miss Whitlock's past? Darian guided her through the gauntlet with practiced ease, his hand on her lower back, proprietary but not aggressive, making a statement without saying a word. Inside, the noise level was manageable, but the attention wasn't. Every conversation stopped when they entered. Every eye tracked their movement across the room. Smile, Darian murmured. Look confident. I don't feel confident. Fake it. That's half the game. They made it approximately 15 minutes before Cassian found them. He approached with a woman on his arm, someone Alara recognized from previous events but couldn't name. Cassian was smiling, but it was the smile of someone planning violence. Darian, Alara, how lovely to see you both here. Cassian, Darian said neutrally, I was just telling Marissa about your fascinating new partnership. She's been dying to hear the details. Cassian's smile widened. Marissa runs the Ashford Tribune Society section. I'm sure you've heard of it. Alara's pulse jumped. The Tribune wasn't a tabloid. It was legitimate press. Anything said here would be on record. There's not much to tell, Alara said carefully. Oh, I doubt that. Marissa pulled out a small notebook. Mind if I ask a few questions? Actually, Alara started. We don't mind at all, Darian said, cutting her off. His hand tightened slightly on her back. A warning. Marissa smiled. Wonderful. So, Miss Whitlock, how exactly did you and Mr. Voss meet? At a social gathering. The Obsidian Hall reception, wasn't it? Where you approached him uninvited and asked for his endorsement? The way she said it made the whole thing sound calculated. Predatory. I was introduced by a mutual acquaintance, Alara said, keeping her voice steady. That's a diplomatic way of putting it, Cassian interjected. What she means is that I dared her to approach Darian as entertainment, and somehow she turned it into an opportunity. Is that true? Marissa asked, writing quickly. Miss Whitlock showed initiative, Darian said before Alara could respond. I found it refreshing. Refreshing enough to bring her into your inner circle within days? I recognize talent when I see it. And what talent would that be exactly? Cassian's voice had an edge now. She has no experience, no connections, no qualifications beyond apparently being bold enough to walk up to you at a party. What could she possibly offer someone like you? The question hung in the air like a knife. Darian's expression didn't change, but Alara felt the tension radiating off him. She offers perspective, he said quietly, something most people in this room lost years ago. Perspective? Cassian laughed. That's your explanation? You've attached yourself to a nobody because she has perspective? Careful, Darian said, and his voice dropped to something dangerous. But Cassian was past careful. He'd been building to this for weeks, and now he had an audience. Everyone knows what this really is, he said, loud enough that conversations nearby stopped. You needed someone you could control. Someone with no power of her own, no ability to challenge you, no leverage to demand actual equality. So you found a desperate farm girl who'd agree to anything for a chance at legitimacy. That's enough, Darian said. Is it? Or is the truth just uncomfortable? Cassian turned to Alara. Tell me something. Do you actually think you're his partner, or do you know, deep down, that you're just his latest acquisition? Alara felt something snap inside her chest. You want to know the truth? She said, her voice cutting through the watching silence. The truth is that I've achieved more in 1 month than you've managed in your entire privileged life. The truth is that I solved a problem Darian's people couldn't solve because I wasn't too proud to actually work, instead of expecting everything to be handed to me. And the truth is that you're terrified. Terrified that someone like me, someone you've spent weeks trying to destroy, has more value to Darian than you ever will. Cassian's face went white, then red. How dare you? How dare I what? Tell the truth? Point out that you've been using your family name and inherited connections to coast through life while looking down on everyone who actually earns their position? Alara took a step forward. You set me up to fail at that reception because you thought it would be funny, but I didn't fail. And now you can't stand that the joke's on you. The crowd around them had gone completely silent. Cassian looked like he wanted to hit her. His hands were shaking. Then he smiled, cold and vicious. You think you've won something, he said softly. You have no idea what you've just done. He turned and walked away, pulling Marissa with him. The crowd slowly resumed their conversations, but Alara could feel the weight of stares, the undercurrent of speculation. Darian's hand was still on her back, but his grip had changed, tighter, almost supportive. That was stupid, he said quietly. I know. He'll retaliate. I know that too. Then why? Because I'm tired of being careful, tired of playing nice while people like him try to break me. Alara finally looked at him. You said this world doesn't reward hesitation. Well, I'm done hesitating. Darian studied her face for a long moment. Good, he said finally, because you're about to find out exactly what happens when you make an enemy of someone who has nothing left to lose. The article hit 3 days later. Not from the Tribune, Marissa had apparently decided the confrontation wasn't worth her publication's reputation. But someone else had been recording. Someone else had captured every word of Alara's outburst and sold it to the highest bidder. The headline read, Voss's Nobody, Farm Girl's Breakdown Reveals Cracks in Power Alliance. But that wasn't the devastating part. The devastating part was the second article that dropped the same morning. This one from an investigative journalist who'd been digging into Alara's background with more resources and fewer scruples than previous attempts. The Whitlock family's secret, financial ruin, and desperate measures. It detailed everything. Her father's failed business ventures, the farm foreclosure her family had barely avoided, the debt that had driven her uncle to send her to Ashford in the first place, not for opportunity, but to escape the shame of their financial collapse. None of it was technically false. All of it made her look like exactly what Cassian had claimed, a desperate nobody who'd latched onto Darian as a lifeline. Alara read both articles sitting in her hotel room while her phone exploded with messages she couldn't bring herself to answer. When someone knocked on her door, she almost didn't open it. But the knock came again, and she recognized the pattern. Darian. She let him in. He looked tired, more tired than she'd ever seen him. He was still wearing yesterday's clothes, which meant he'd been dealing with fallout all night. We need to talk, he said. I'm guessing this is the part where you tell me I'm done. No. This is the part where I tell you that Cassian didn't stop at articles. Darian moved to her window, looking out at the city below. He went to the consortium, told them you're a liability, that associating with me means associating with you, and associating with you means inheriting all your baggage. And what did they say? That I need to choose. The alliance, or you. Alara felt her stomach drop. Then you choose the alliance, obviously. Is it obvious? Yes, you said it yourself. This is about survival and strategic positioning. I'm not worth losing that. Maybe not. Darian turned back to face her. But here's what Cassian doesn't understand. The alliance isn't just about business connections. It's about showing the world that I'm building something different, something that doesn't rely on the same old patterns and power structures that have been recycling the same people for generations. I'm not following. If I drop you now, if I let Cassian and his crowd force me to abandon you the moment things get difficult, then everything I've been building becomes meaningless. I'll have proven that I'm exactly what they've always believed. Someone who only values people as long as they're useful and discards them the moment they become inconvenient. Alara stared at him. You're saying you won't drop me? I'm saying I can't, not without undermining everything this alliance is supposed to represent. That's not the same as wanting to keep me around. No, Darian agreed. It's not. The honesty hurt more than she'd expected. So what now? She asked. Now you make a choice. You can walk away. Leave Ashford, go back home, and I'll make sure the worst of the press dies down eventually. Or you can stay, and we fight this together. But if you stay, you need to understand that it's going to get worse before it gets better. Cassian won't stop until one of us is destroyed. And if we win, then you'll have power, real power, the kind that doesn't depend on anyone's permission or approval. Alara thought about her uncle's warnings, about the farm foreclosure and the shame of failure, about arriving in Ashford with everything she owned in 2 leather cases and nothing but hope to sustain her. She thought about Victoria Cross in that warehouse, giving up everything because she didn't have the stomach for the fight. She thought about Darian's cold assessment, Cassian's vicious smile, and the dress that had fit perfectly without her asking. I'll stay, she said. You're sure? No, but I'm doing it anyway. Darian's expression shifted, something that might have been respect or relief or both. Then we need to move fast. Cassian is planning something big. I don't know what yet, but my sources say it's coming soon. What kind of something? The kind designed to make sure you can't recover. The kind that will force me to choose between salvaging my reputation or protecting yours. He moved closer. We need to find out what he's planning before he can execute it. How? By doing what you do best, being bold when everyone expects you to hide. Alara felt a chill run down her spine. She'd wanted to stop being careful, wanted to prove she could fight back. She was about to get her chance, and the cost might be everything. The plan came together in Darian's office over 3 pots of coffee and 6 hours of arguing. You can't be serious, Alara said for the 4th time. I'm always serious. Darian was leaning against his desk, arms crossed, looking at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. It's the only move that makes sense. It makes sense if you're suicidal. What you're describing is walking into their territory on their terms and hoping they don't tear me apart. They're going to tear you apart regardless. At least this way you control the narrative. Alara wanted to throw something, preferably at his head. They'd spent hours trying to figure out what Cassian was planning. Darian's sources had picked up fragments, mentions of a gathering, some kind of formal event where the city's power players would be present. But the details were vague, deliberately obscured. What they did know was that it was happening in 2 days. And whatever Cassian had planned, it was designed to be public, humiliating, and final. Darian's solution was characteristically ruthless. Don't wait for the ambush. Walk straight into it and force a confrontation on their own terms. You're asking me to stand in front of everyone who's been trying to destroy me and defend myself against accusations I don't even know yet, Alara said. Yes. That's insane. That's strategy. Darian moved to the window, his usual thinking position. Cassian's power comes from controlling the conversation. He sets the terms, picks the moment, decides what information gets released when. If you show up voluntarily, you take that control away from him. Or I hand him exactly what he wants, a public execution. Only if you let him define the narrative. Darian turned back to face her. You've survived everything he's thrown at you so far. The rumors, the leaked information, the articles. You're still here. Still standing. That terrifies him more than anything else could. He doesn't look terrified, because you're not looking at the right things. Why do you think he's escalating? Why move from whisper campaigns to public confrontations to whatever he's planning now? Because the subtle approach isn't working. You're not breaking. Alara sat down heavily in one of the chairs facing his desk. Her head was pounding. She'd barely slept since the articles had hit, and the adrenaline that had been keeping her upright was starting to fade. What if I can't do this? She asked quietly. Then you couldn't do it from the beginning, and everything we've built was wasted time. Darian's voice was matter-of-fact, not cruel. But I don't think that's true. I think you're capable of more than you realize. You just haven't been pushed far enough to find out yet. I've been pushed plenty. No, you've been tested. There's a difference. Before Alara could respond, Darian's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and something in his expression changed. What? Alara asked. It's Marcus Heilman. He wants to meet with you. Why? He didn't say, but given that we solved his blackmail problem, I'd guess it's not hostile. Darian typed a quick response. He's downstairs, says it's urgent. 10 minutes later, Marcus Heilman sat across from Alara in the same conference room where she'd first agreed to Darian's partnership. He looked older than his photographs suggested, late 50s, graying at the temples, with the kind of exhaustion that came from carrying stress for too long. Miss Whitlock, he said, his voice rough. Thank you for seeing me. I wasn't aware I had a choice. Marcus almost smiled. Fair enough. I'll be direct. My wife told me what you did, how you found Victoria Cross, how you convinced her to give up the evidence without violence or threats. That took skill. And guts. I was doing what Darian asked. You were doing more than that. You could have approached the situation like one of Voss's usual fixers, intimidation, leverage, force. Instead, you talked to her, treated her like a person. That matters. Alara didn't know what to say to that, so she stayed quiet. Marcus leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. I'm here because I owe you a debt, and because I've heard what's happening with Cassian Holt. Everyone's heard about that. Yes, but not everyone knows what he's actually planning. Marcus pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket and slid it across the table. This came to my office yesterday, an invitation to a private reception at the Merchants Club. Very exclusive, very select guest list. All the major players in Ashford's business community. Alara unfolded the paper. The invitation was elegant, formal, and completely opaque about its actual purpose. What is this really about? She asked. It's a tribunal, Marcus said flatly. Cassian and his allies are calling for a formal vote. They want the consortium to officially denounce their association with Darian, and by extension, with you. If the vote goes through, you'll be blacklisted from every legitimate business circle in the city. Can they do that? Technically, no. The consortium doesn't have that kind of official power, but practically, Marcus gestured at the invitation. If everyone in this room agrees that you're a liability, it becomes truth. Doors close, opportunities vanish, you could be the most capable person in Ashford, and it wouldn't matter. Alara felt cold. So that's his plan. Not a scandal, not more articles, just erasure. Effective, isn't it? He can't break you, so he's going to make sure the entire power structure turns its back on you. Marcus paused. Unless you show up and fight back. I'm not invited. Yes, you are. That's why I'm here. Marcus pulled out a second invitation, identical to the first, but with Alara's name written in elegant script. Cassian sent this to my office, assuming I'd refuse to deliver it. He's counting on you not knowing about the tribunal until after it's over. But Catherine insisted I bring it to you. She said you deserve a chance to defend yourself. Why would she do that? Because you helped us when you didn't have to. Because you treated a blackmailer with more humanity than most people treat their friends. And because she thinks you're the first genuinely decent person Darian Voss has associated with in 5 years. Marcus stood. I can't vote against Cassian. I don't have that kind of leverage, and fighting him publicly would destroy what's left of my reputation. But I can give you this chance. What you do with it is up to you. He left the invitation on the table and walked out. Alara stared at the elegant cardstock, her mind racing. She could ignore it. Let the tribunal happen, accept the blacklisting, and try to build something outside of Ashford's traditional power structures. Or she could walk into that room and face down every person who'd been waiting for her to fail. When she looked up, Darian was standing in the doorway. He'd clearly been listening. Well, he said, I'm going. Good, because I already planned for that possibility. He moved into the room, setting down a leather folder. If you're doing this, we do it right. No improvisation, no hoping for the best. We prepare for every possible attack they could throw at you. How do we do that? We make them come to us. Darian opened the folder, revealing page after page of notes, documents, financial records. Cassian's power comes from the fact that he's part of the old guard. Old family, old money, old connections. But old doesn't mean clean. Everyone has vulnerabilities. We just need to find his. They worked through the night. Darian's resources were extensive. Contacts in financial institutions, legal firms, property management companies. Within hours, they'd assembled a picture of Cassian's empire that was considerably less impressive than his public image suggested. The Holt family fortune was old, yes, but it was also dwindling. Bad investments over the past decade had eroded significant portions of their wealth. Cassian maintained appearances through credit and strategic partnerships, but the foundation was shakier than anyone realized. More interesting was a series of property transactions from 3 years ago. Cassian had purchased several commercial buildings in Ashford's warehouse district, properties that should have been worthless, but that he'd paid well above market value for. Money laundering? Alara suggested. Possibly. Or he knew something about future development that wasn't public yet. Darian pulled up city planning documents. The port expansion project. It was announced 2 years ago, but the planning started at least a year before that. If Cassian had advanced knowledge, insider trading. No, not technically. Property speculation based on privileged information isn't illegal unless you can prove the information was obtained through official channels. Darian sat back. But it does suggest that Cassian isn't the paragon of traditional values he pretends to be. He's just better at hiding his shortcuts. Will this be enough? Enough for what? To destroy him? No. To make him think twice about destroying you? Maybe. Darian closed his laptop. The goal isn't to win the tribunal. The goal is to make them understand that coming after you means accepting casualties on their side too. Mutually assured destruction. Welcome to how power actually works. Alara looked at the stack of documents they'd assembled. Evidence of financial strain, questionable transactions, carefully maintained illusions. It felt dirty. Necessary, but dirty. I hate this, she said. I know. Do you? Hate it, I mean. Darian was quiet for a moment. I used to. Now it's just what I do. You stop questioning it after a while. That's depressing. That's reality. He stood, stretching. Get some rest. Tomorrow we prepare your statement. The day after, you walk into that room and show them exactly what it costs to underestimate you. The Merchants Club occupied a building that had been standing since Ashford's founding. All dark wood and leather chairs, portraits of dead men on the walls, the smell of old money and older privilege. Alara arrived exactly on time, wearing another dress that had appeared in her hotel room that morning. Black this time, severe and elegant, making her look older than her years. Darian walked beside her, his expression unreadable. The doorman tried to stop them. I'm sorry, sir, but this is a private event. Darian handed him both invitations without breaking stride. The doorman paled. Of course, my apologies. The reception is in the main hall. They walked through corridors lined with the history of Ashford's elite families. Photographs, newspaper clippings, achievement plaques. Generations of power concentrated in a few dozen bloodlines. Alara had never felt more like an outsider. The main hall was exactly what she'd expected. 50 or so people, all of them dressed expensively, all of them turning to stare when she and Darian entered. Cassian stood near the front of the room beside a makeshift podium, his expression cycling rapidly from surprise to anger to calculation. He hadn't expected her to actually show up. Darian, he said, his voice carrying across the sudden silence, how kind of you to join us. Though I'm confused, I don't recall your name on the guest list. Marcus Heilman extended an invitation, Darian said calmly, as did you, apparently, to Miss Whitlock. That invitation was delivered as a courtesy, not an expectation of attendance. Then you don't know Miss Whitlock very well. Cassian's jaw tightened. Perhaps we should begin. Everyone's time is valuable. He moved to the podium, and the room arranged itself into loose rows facing him. Alara found herself standing near the back, Darian solid and immovable beside her. Thank you all for coming, Cassian began. I know this gathering was arranged on short notice, but the matter at hand demands urgent attention. As many of you know, our business community has recently been disrupted by newcomers who don't understand or respect the traditions and standards we've maintained for generations. Several people nodded. Others looked uncomfortable. Specifically, Cassian continued, I'm referring to Darian Voss's decision to publicly associate himself with someone who has no credentials, no background, and no demonstrated value beyond a willingness to insert herself into situations where she doesn't belong. Her name is Alara Whitlock, Darian said, his voice cutting through the room. If you're going to attack her character, at least have the courage to use her name. Cassian's smile was thin. Very well. Alara Whitlock, a woman who arrived in Ashford less than 2 months ago with fabricated credentials, a family history of financial failure, and a concerning pattern of attaching herself to powerful men in hopes of advancement. That's a lie, Alara said. Is it? Then perhaps you'd like to explain your family's bankruptcy, the farm foreclosure, the debt that drove you here? My family faced hardship. That's not a crime. No, but misrepresenting yourself is. You've presented yourself as someone with ambition and capability when in reality you're just desperate enough to do whatever it takes to escape poverty. Cassian gestured broadly at the room. That desperation makes you unpredictable, unreliable, a liability to anyone foolish enough to trust you. I solved Marcus Heilman's blackmail problem in 2 days, Alara said, her voice steady despite the rage building in her chest. What have you solved lately besides which restaurant to charge to your family's dwindling credit line? The room went dead silent. Cassian's face flushed red. How dare you? How dare I what? Point out that your family's fortune isn't what you pretend it is? That you've been living on borrowed money and borrowed reputation for years while criticizing everyone else for not meeting your standards? That's slander. That's truth. Alara pulled out the documents she and Darian had prepared, holding them up. Commercial property purchases 3 years ago. You paid 40% above market value for buildings in the warehouse district, properties that became extremely valuable when the port expansion was announced a year later. Convenient timing. Property investment isn't illegal. No, but insider trading is, and knowing about public development projects before they're announced suggests someone gave you information they shouldn't have. You can't prove that. I don't have to prove it. I just have to make everyone in this room wonder how you knew, wonder who you're connected to, wonder what other shortcuts you've taken while pretending to be the guardian of traditional values. Alara took a step forward. You called this tribunal because you wanted to destroy my reputation. But the thing about public confrontations is they cut both ways. So let's talk about reputation. Let's talk about the fact that you've spent weeks attacking me because I walked up to Darian Voss at a party and refused to back down when you tried to humiliate me. Let's talk about how that threatened you so much that you've dedicated yourself to making sure I never get a chance to prove myself. You don't deserve a chance, Cassian said, his voice shaking. You're nobody. You don't belong here. Maybe I don't, but I'm here anyway. And unlike you, I didn't get here by inheriting it or buying it or sleeping my way into position. I got here by being smart enough, brave enough, and stubborn enough to survive everything you threw at me. Alara looked around the room. You all want to know if I'm a liability? Fine. I'm the person who walks into warehouses alone and negotiates with blackmailers. I'm the person who stands in front of hostile crowds and defends herself when she could have run. I'm the person who looks at a system designed to crush outsiders and decides to fight anyway. If that makes me a liability, then I'm guilty as charged. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Marcus Heilman started clapping, slowly, deliberately, alone at first. Then Catherine joined him from where she stood near the side of the room. Then others, not everyone, but enough that the sound grew from isolated applause to something that filled the space. Cassian looked around in disbelief. This is ridiculous. You're all being manipulated. No, said the older man who'd been at Darian's original consortium meeting. We're being reminded that courage and capability matter more than pedigree. He looked at Cassian. You called this tribunal because you wanted us to denounce Miss Whitlock. I vote no. Seconded, someone else said. Agreed. Absolutely not. The girl's earned her place. Cassian's composure cracked. You're making a mistake. All of you. She's going to destroy everything we've built. We've built? Darian's voice cut through Cassian's desperation like a knife. You've built nothing, Cassian. You've inherited, maintained, and slowly lost everything your family spent generations accumulating. Miss Whitlock has built more in 2 months than you've managed in your entire life. I won't accept this. You don't have a choice. Darian moved forward, standing beside Alara. The tribunal is over. The vote went against you. And if you try anything like this again, I will personally make sure everyone in Ashford knows exactly how fragile your empire really is. Cassian stared at them both, his expression twisting through rage, humiliation, and something that might have been fear. Then he turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing in the sudden quiet. People started talking immediately, low conversations, speculation, reassessment. Several approached Alara directly, introducing themselves, offering veiled apologies disguised as congratulations. Through it all, Darian stayed beside her, a solid presence in the chaos. When they finally escaped to the relative quiet of the building's exterior courtyard, Alara found she was shaking. "Did that just happen?" she asked. "Yes." "Did we win?" "For now." Darian looked at her, something unreadable in his expression. "You surprised me." "How?" "I expected you to defend yourself. I didn't expect you to go on offense. Attacking Cassian's finances, questioning his legitimacy, that took guts. I learned from watching you. No, you did something I wouldn't have done. You made it personal. You told them exactly who you are and dared them to reject you anyway." He paused. "That was either brilliant or suicidal. I still haven't decided which." "Can it be both?" "With you?" "Probably." Darian's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and frowned. "We need to go." "What's wrong?" "Cassian's not done. He just left the club in a hurry, and my sources say he's making calls. Urgent ones." "Calls to who?" "People who are considerably less concerned with public opinion and considerably more willing to use direct action." Darian started walking toward his car. "He's escalating beyond social warfare." "Into what?" "The kind of territory where reputations are the least of our concerns." They drove through Ashford in tense silence. Darian made several calls, each one brief and coded in language Alara didn't fully understand. By the time they reached his office building, security had been increased. Additional guards at the entrance, cameras repositioned, protocols adjusted. "What exactly are we worried about?" Alara asked as they took the elevator up. "At minimum, legal action. Fabricated charges, investigations into business dealings, anything to tie us up in litigation and negative press." Darian's jaw was tight. "At maximum? Physical threats. Cassian's family still has connections to some of Ashford's less savory elements. If he's desperate enough to use them." "You think he'd actually hurt us?" "I think he's lost everything tonight. His reputation, his credibility, the respect of his peers. When people like Cassian lose everything, they stop calculating consequences." They spent the next several hours in Darian's office, monitoring communications and coordinating with security. Nothing happened. No attacks, no threats, no mysterious legal documents, just silence, which somehow felt worse. Around midnight, Alara's phone rang. Unknown number. She answered cautiously. "Hello?" "Miss Whitlock, it's Victoria Cross." Alara sat up straight. "Victoria, how did you—" "Doesn't matter. Listen to me. You're in danger. Cassian Holt has been making inquiries about you, about what happened with Marcus Heilman, about the documents I gave you." "How do you know this?" "Because he tried to hire me. Wanted me to testify that you coerced me, threatened me, that everything I told you was under duress." Victoria's voice was tight. "I told him to go to hell, but he's not stopping. He's trying to build a case that you're involved in blackmail, extortion, maybe worse." "He can't prove that." "He doesn't need to prove it. He just needs to make enough people believe it that your reputation gets destroyed permanently." Victoria paused. "I owe you. You got me that archival job like you promised, and it probably saved my life. So I'm warning you, get ahead of this. Tell your side of the story before he tells his." The line went dead. Alara looked at Darian. "We have a problem." By dawn, they'd assembled a strategy. Not a defense, a counteroffensive. If Cassian wanted to make this about truth and credibility, they'd give him truth, all of it. The full story of Marcus Heilman's blackmail, Victoria Cross's involvement, Alara's investigation and resolution. They'd release it publicly, with statements from everyone involved, before Cassian could twist the narrative. It was risky. It exposed details that Marcus would probably prefer stayed private, but Marcus, when contacted, agreed immediately. "If it's between my embarrassment and your destruction," he said, "I'll take embarrassment. Release whatever you need." The story broke the next morning across multiple platforms simultaneously. Major papers, business publications, even some mainstream media picked it up. The headline varied by outlet, but the core was the same. Local businesswoman resolves high-stakes blackmail through negotiation, not threats. The article detailed everything: Marcus's situation, the blackmail scheme, Alara's investigation, her conversation with Victoria Cross, and the peaceful resolution that had saved Marcus's reputation and given Victoria a legitimate career. It painted Alara not as a schemer or social climber, but as someone who'd solved a complex problem with intelligence and compassion. By noon, the response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from business owners who'd heard about her work, offers for consulting positions, requests for advice on delicate situations, even a few job proposals from firms looking for someone with her particular skills. More importantly, the consortium members who'd witnessed the tribunal started speaking out publicly. Endorsements, statements of support, acknowledgement that they'd judged her too quickly and that her capabilities were undeniable. The tide was turning. Not everywhere. There were still people who believed Cassian's version, still outlets that questioned her motives. But the overwhelming momentum had shifted in her favor. 3 days after the tribunal, Alara received a formal letter from the Merchants Association, an invitation to join as a provisional member. It was basically an apology wrapped in bureaucratic language, but she'd take it. Darian read the letter over her shoulder, his expression unreadable. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Strange. Like I won something I didn't know I was competing for." "You were always competing, you just weren't aware of the rules." "And now?" "Now you've changed the rules. That's more valuable than winning under the old ones." Darian moved to his usual spot by the windows. "Cassian's gone quiet. My sources say he's withdrawn from most of his social commitments. Rumor is his family's concerned about his stability. Should I feel bad about that?" "Do you?" Alara thought about it honestly. "No. He tried to destroy me multiple times. I just defended myself." "Good. Guilt is wasted energy." Darian turned back to face her. "The consortium is meeting next week. Real meeting this time, not a tribunal. They want to formalize the alliance structure, and they've specifically requested your presence as an equal participant." "Equal? You've proven yourself. They can't ignore that anymore." He paused. "The question is whether you still want it. This world, this life, this constant battle for position and recognition. You could walk away now. You've got offers from legitimate firms, enough credibility to build something on your own terms. You don't need me anymore." Alara looked at him, trying to read past the cold exterior. "Is that what you want? For me to leave?" "What I want is irrelevant." "That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're getting." Darian's expression softened slightly, barely noticeable, but there. "You came to Ashford because you wanted something better than what you had. You've achieved that. What happens next is up to you." Alara thought about the farm in Grayfield, the foreclosure her family had barely avoided, the shame that had driven her south to a city that had tried to break her at every turn. She thought about Victoria Cross, Marcus Heilman, Catherine's quiet support, the tribunal where she'd stood alone and refused to apologize for existing. She thought about Darian's calculated manipulation and surprising moments of honesty, the way he'd stood beside her when he could have walked away. "I'm staying," she said. "Why?" "Because I'm not finished yet. I proved I could survive in your world. Now I want to prove I can change it." Darian studied her for a long moment. Then he did something Alara had never seen before. He smiled, really smiled. Not the cold calculation or the predatory focus, but genuine amusement mixed with something that might have been pride. "All right then," he said. "Let's change the world." The consortium meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 2 in the afternoon. Alara spent the morning trying not to throw up. "You'll be fine," Darian said for the third time, not looking up from the documents he was reviewing. They were in his office, had been since 7 that morning, going over projections, proposals, contingencies. "You keep saying that." "Because it's true." "Easy for you to say. You've done this 100 times. More like 1,000, and I was terrified the first dozen." He finally looked up. "The difference between fear and confidence isn't that confident people don't feel fear. It's that they've learned fear is just information. It tells you what matters. It doesn't tell you what to do." "That's almost philosophical." "Don't sound so surprised." Alara's phone buzzed. A message from Catherine Heilman. "You've got this. Make them remember why they were wrong about you." She showed it to Darian, who read it and nodded. "Marcus and Catherine have been talking you up to anyone who'll listen. You've got more allies walking into that room than you think. And how many enemies?" "Fewer than last week." Darian closed his laptop. "Cassian's influence has collapsed. Most of his former supporters have distanced themselves publicly. The ones who haven't are irrelevant." "What about Cassian himself?" "Still quiet. My sources say he's left the city, family estate up north, self-imposed exile while he figures out his next move." "Do you think he's done?" "No, but I think he's smart enough to know that coming at you directly again would be suicide." Darian stood, adjusting his jacket. "Ready?" "No." "Good. The best decisions happen when you're uncomfortable." The meeting was held in a private dining room at the Grand Ashford Hotel, neutral territory, expensive enough to remind everyone of what was at stake. Alara walked in beside Darian, and the conversations around the long table stuttered into silence. 12 people sat waiting. She recognized most of them from various encounters over the past 2 months, Marcus and Catherine Heilman. The older man from previous meetings, she'd learned his name was Edmund Thorne, shipping magnate and old money personified. Several others whose faces she knew, but whose names escaped her under pressure. At the far end of the table sat someone new, a woman in her 60s, perfectly dressed, radiating the kind of authority that didn't need announcement. She looked up as Alara entered, and her expression was assessing but not hostile. "Miss Whitlock," the woman said, "I'm Victoria Ashford Chen. My family founded this city, in case the name didn't make that obvious. Please, sit." Alara took the seat Darian indicated, halfway down the table, where she could see everyone and everyone could see her. Darian sat beside her, close enough that their presence read as unified. "Shall we begin?" Victoria Ashford Chen looked around the table. "We're here to formalize the consortium structure that Mr. Voss proposed several months ago. Given recent events, I think it's fair to say the landscape has changed significantly from our initial discussions." "That's an understatement," Edmund Thorne said. His voice carried the weight of someone used to being heard. "We've all watched Miss Whitlock's rather dramatic introduction to Ashford's business community. The question now is whether that drama represents the future we want, or a cautionary tale about lowering standards." "Careful, Edmund," Marcus said quietly. "That sounds dangerously close to the rhetoric Cassian was using." "I'm not Cassian. I'm asking a legitimate question." Edmund looked directly at Alara. "No offense intended, Miss Whitlock, but you have to understand our concern. You arrived with no credentials, no connections, and no track record. Within weeks, you're sitting at this table as if you belong here. Some of us need convincing that this isn't just Darian Voss making a point at our expense." Alara felt Darian tense beside her, but she put a hand on his arm. This was her fight. "You want to know if I belong here," she said. "Fair enough. Let me ask you something first. What does belonging mean? Having the right family name, inheriting the right connections, or proving you can solve problems that everyone else failed to solve?" "Capability matters," Edmund acknowledged. "But so does stability, reliability, trust built over years, not weeks. Trust built over years is just another way of saying people who won't challenge the system because they benefit from it staying exactly as it is." Alara leaned forward. "I solved Marcus Heilman's blackmail problem in 2 days. I walked into a hostile tribunal and defended myself against coordinated attacks from someone who'd been planning my destruction for weeks. I've survived every test this city threw at me, and I'm still here. If that's not proof of capability and stability, then I don't know what your standards actually are." The proof is that she makes us uncomfortable, Victoria Ashford Chen said, a slight smile playing at her lips. And discomfort is exactly what this consortium needs. Explain, Edmund said. Look around this table. We represent Ashford's power structure, old families, established wealth, traditional approaches to business and influence. We're very good at maintaining what exists. We're terrible at adapting to what's coming. Victoria gestured at Alara. Miss Whitlock represents something most of us have forgotten, the ability to operate without the safety net of inherited advantage. She can't rely on family connections or old debts owed. She has to be smarter, faster, more willing to take risks. That's not a liability, that's an asset. Or it's a recipe for chaos, another voice interjected. A younger man, early 40s, wearing calculated casualness that probably cost a fortune. No offense, but giving power to someone with no stake in preserving the existing order seems like asking for trouble. I have plenty of stake, Alara said. I'm building something here. A reputation, a career, relationships that matter. Just because I didn't inherit my stake doesn't mean I don't value it. But you could walk away tomorrow, the man pressed. You have no family holdings to protect, no legacy to preserve. What keeps you invested when things get difficult? The fact that I chose this, Alara's voice was steady. Every single person at this table was born into their position or inherited it. I had to fight for mine. That means I value it differently, not less, differently. I'm invested because I built this myself, and I'm not about to let it fall apart. Silence around the table. Then Catherine Heilman spoke for the first time. I think what my colleagues are dancing around saying is that they're afraid. Afraid that if someone like Alara can rise this quickly, it means their children and grandchildren might not have the automatic advantages they've taken for granted. Afraid that merit might actually start mattering more than birthright. She looked around the table. And honestly, that fear is probably justified. The world is changing whether we like it or not. We can adapt, or we can become irrelevant. Strong words, Edmund said. True words. Catherine turned to Alara. You saved my husband's reputation and possibly his life. You did it with intelligence and compassion when you could have just used leverage and threats. That tells me more about your character than any family name ever could. I appreciate that, Alara said. But I also want to be clear about something. I'm not here to destroy what you've all built. I'm here because Darian convinced me that changing the system from inside it is more effective than fighting it from the outside. If you're all worried I'm going to come in and blow everything up, you're wrong. I'm interested in building, not destroying. Building what? Victoria Ashford Chen asked. Something that works for more than just the people already at the top. Alara took a breath. I grew up watching my family struggle, not because they were lazy or incompetent, but because the system was designed to keep people like us in place. Limited access to capital, limited connections, limited opportunities to prove ourselves. I don't want revenge against that system. I want to change it so the next person who grows up like I did doesn't face the same walls I did. That's idealistic, Edmund said. Maybe, but it's also profitable. Think about how much talent gets wasted because people don't have access to the right networks. How many problems don't get solved because the people capable of solving them never get a chance to try. Alara gestured around the table. You're all worried about maintaining what you have. I'm interested in growing what's possible. Those goals aren't incompatible. Victoria Ashford Chen smiled fully now. Mr. Voss, I take back every reservation I had about your judgment. She's remarkable. I know, Darian said simply. Then let's vote. Victoria looked around the table. All in favor of formalizing the consortium structure with Miss Whitlock as a full participating member? Hands went up. Not everyone. 3 people abstained, including Edmund Thorne. But enough. More than enough. Motion carries, Victoria made a note in the ledger in front of her. Welcome to the consortium, Miss Whitlock. Try not to blow it up in your first year. I'll do my best. The meeting continued for another 2 hours, working through structural details and operational frameworks. Alara contributed where she could, stayed quiet when she was out of her depth, and tried not to feel overwhelmed by the fact that she was sitting at a table with people who collectively controlled a significant portion of Ashford's economy. When it finally ended, people filed out in small groups. Marcus and Catherine stopped to congratulate her personally. Edmund Thorne nodded stiffly but didn't speak. Victoria Ashford Chen shook her hand and said, I expect great things from you. Don't disappoint me. By the time the room cleared, only Alara and Darian remained. Well, he said, I think I'm going to be sick. That's a normal response. It'll pass. Darian gathered his papers. You did well, better than well. You made them see you as an asset instead of a threat. Some of them still see me as a threat. Good. Keep them uncomfortable. Comfortable people don't innovate. They walked out together into the hotel's lobby. Outside, the late afternoon sun painted Ashford's skyline in gold and shadow. The city looked different somehow, less hostile, more like something Alara might actually belong in. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number again. She answered cautiously. Hello? Miss Whitlock, it's Cassian. Alara stopped walking. Darian noticed immediately, his expression hardening. What do you want? She asked. To apologize. Cassian's voice was tired, stripped of the venomous confidence she'd come to associate with him. I spent the last week thinking about everything that happened, about why I did what I did, and I realized I was wrong. Is this a trick? No. No trick, just acknowledgement. Cassian was quiet for a moment. I went after you because you represented everything I was afraid of. Change, merit over legacy. The idea that everything my family built could be made irrelevant by someone who just worked harder and smarter than I did. That terrified me. So I tried to destroy you. You almost succeeded, but I didn't. And now I'm sitting in my family's estate watching everything I thought I'd inherit fall apart because I was too busy attacking you to actually build anything of my own. He laughed, but it was hollow. Turns out you were right. About all of it. I've been coasting on my family's reputation my entire life. You built something real in 2 months while I spent the same time trying to tear you down. That's on me. Alara didn't know what to say. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to hear it, and because I need to say it. Cassian took a breath. I'm leaving Ashford. My family thinks I need time away to reassess my priorities. They're right. I don't know if I'll come back, but if I do, I want you to know I won't be your enemy anymore. I can't promise we'll be friends, but I won't stand in your way. I appreciate that. You shouldn't. An apology doesn't undo the damage I caused. Another pause. For what it's worth, I hope you succeed. I hope you change this city. It needs someone who actually cares about more than just maintaining power. The line went dead. Alara stared at her phone. That was unexpected, Darian said. Is he serious? Hard to say, but it doesn't matter. Whether Cassian's having a genuine crisis of conscience or just regrouping, he's out of the picture for now. That's what matters. They continued walking out of the hotel and into the street. The evening crowd was picking up, people leaving offices, heading to dinner, living their lives without any awareness of the power shifts happening around them. What happens now? Alara asked. Now you actually have to do the work. The consortium will expect results, projects, initiatives, proof that their faith in you was justified. Darian glanced at her. No more fighting for survival. Now you're fighting to build something that lasts. Sounds exhausting. It is. But it's also the only thing worth doing. They reached Darian's car. The driver stood ready, but Darian waved him off. I need to walk for a bit, he said. Clear my head. You should get some rest. Tomorrow starts the real work. Alara watched him go, disappearing into the early evening crowd like he was just another person instead of one of the most powerful men in the city. She pulled out her phone and made a call she'd been putting off for weeks. Her uncle answered on the third ring. Alara, that you? Yeah, it's me. We've been worried sick, saw some articles online, couldn't tell if they were true or just garbage. Are you all right? I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. I wanted to call, let you know I'm okay, that I made it. Made what? A place for myself, in this city. It's not what I expected, and it's definitely not easy, but I think I'm going to be able to do something real here. Her uncle was quiet for a moment. You scared us when you left. Your aunt said you'd end up broken or worse. I told her you were tougher than that. Sounds like I was right. Barely. It was close a few times. But you made it through. That's what matters. She could hear the smile in his voice. Your parents would have been proud. Alara felt her throat tighten. Thanks. That means a lot. They talked for another few minutes, catching up on farm news, family updates, the mundane details of life that felt impossibly distant from where Alara was standing. When she finally hung up, she felt lighter somehow, like she'd closed a circle she hadn't known was open. The weeks that followed were a blur of work that was somehow both harder and easier than everything that had come before. Harder because the expectations were enormous. The consortium wanted proof that Alara's inclusion was worthwhile. They wanted initiatives, proposals, results. She worked 16-hour days, sometimes more, building frameworks for programs that would expand access to business development resources for people from non-traditional backgrounds. It was exhausting, frustrating, occasionally maddening, but it was also building something real. Easier because she wasn't fighting for basic recognition anymore. The battle for legitimacy was over. Now she was just doing the work. Darian remained a constant presence, sometimes helpful, sometimes infuriating, always pushing her to think bigger than she would have on her own. They argued about strategy at least twice a week. They disagreed about priorities constantly, but they also developed something that looked almost like friendship, if friendship could exist between two people who'd started as a social trap and a calculated risk. 3 months after the consortium formalization, Alara launched her first major initiative, a grant program for entrepreneurs from lower-income backgrounds. It provided seed funding, mentorship connections, and access to the kind of networks that usually required family connections to reach. The applications flooded in, hundreds of them, from people across Ashford and beyond, people who'd been told they weren't the right fit, didn't have the right background, couldn't possibly succeed without the advantages others had been born with. Alara read every single application personally. She selected 15 businesses for the first round of funding: manufacturing, technology, service industries. Not because they were guaranteed successes, but because they showed the kind of innovative thinking that came from actually understanding the problems regular people faced. 6 months after launch, 12 of the 15 businesses were still operational. 3 had already started hiring. 1 was projecting revenue that would put them in position to seek traditional funding within a year. The numbers were modest, but they were real. And they were just the beginning. The 1-year anniversary of Alara's arrival in Ashford fell on a Tuesday. She marked it by standing on the balcony of the apartment she'd finally been able to afford, not luxury by Ashford standards, but comfortable in hers, looking out over the city that had tried so hard to break her. Darian found her there around sunset. "Thought I'd find you here," he said, stepping onto the balcony beside her. "How did you get in?" "Building manager likes me." "Building manager is afraid of you." Same effect, different motivation. Darian looked out at the skyline. 1 year feels like longer. Feels like 5 years, maybe 10. That's how you know you've actually lived it instead of just existing through it. He turned to face her. "I have something for you. If it's another dress I didn't ask for." "It's not a dress." He handed her a folder. "It's a partnership offer. Real partnership, legal documentation, equal stake in the ventures we've been building together." Alara opened the folder, scanning the documents inside. It was exactly what he'd said, a formal partnership agreement that gave her equal ownership of the investment fund they'd been developing, the grant programs, everything they'd built over the past year. "Why?" she asked. "Because you've earned it, and because I'm tired of people assuming you're here because I'm charitable. This makes it official. Equal partners, equal investment, equal liability. Equal liability means if something fails, we both go down." "Yes, that's what partnership means." Alara looked at the documents, then at Darian. "You know what people will say. They'll assume this means we're together, romantically." "Let them assume whatever they want. We know the truth." "Do we?" Alara asked quietly. "Because sometimes I'm not sure what this is. We're not friends exactly, not just business partners either. We exist in some weird space between ally and annoyance." Darian smiled, one of those rare, genuine expressions that reminded Alara he was human under all the calculation. I think that's just what happens when two people spend a year surviving impossible situations together. You can't categorize it neatly. That's not very satisfying. Life rarely is. He leaned against the balcony railing. For what it's worth, I respect you more than almost anyone I've ever worked with. You've surprised me, challenged me, and occasionally made me want to throw you out a window. That's as close to friendship as I'm capable of. That's depressing. That's honest. Alara looked back at the city. A year ago, she'd arrived with 2 suitcases in desperate hope. Now she had a home, a career, partnerships that actually meant something. She'd survived Cassian's attacks, proved herself to people who'd written her off, built something real that would outlast whatever happened next. She'd done more than survive. She'd changed the game. "I'll sign the partnership agreement," she said, "on one condition." "What condition?" "We expand the grant program, double the funding. I want to reach more people, help more businesses get started. The 15 we funded this year proved the concept works. Now we scale it." Darian considered this. "That's aggressive. It'll require significant capital and infrastructure." "I know. And if it fails? Then we fail together. That's what partnership means." He laughed, actually laughed, which was rare enough that Alara counted it as a victory. "All right," he said, "we'll double it. But you handle the expansion planning. I'm not holding your hand through everything." "I don't need you to hold my hand." "Good, because I'm terrible at it." They stood there together as the sun finished setting, painting Ashford in shades of purple and gold. The city stretched out below them, full of people fighting their own battles, building their own futures, trying to carve space in a world that didn't want to make room for them. Alara thought about the farm in Grayfield, the foreclosure her family had barely avoided, the shame and fear that had driven her south. She thought about the Obsidian Hall reception, where everything had started, Cassian's cruel dare, Darian's cold assessment. She thought about Victoria Cross in that warehouse, Marcus and Catherine's support, the tribunal where she'd stood alone and refused to apologize. All of it had led here. To this balcony, this partnership, this moment where she could look at Ashford and see not a city that had tried to break her, but a city she'd fought to change. "I'm glad I stayed," she said. "So am I," Darian replied. "Though I'd appreciate it if you didn't make me say sentimental things too often. It's bad for my reputation." "Your reputation as what? A heartless power broker who secretly cares about people?" "Exactly. That reputation took years to build." Alara smiled. "Your secret's safe with me." They went inside where paperwork waited and plans needed finalizing. The work never stopped. There were always more problems to solve, more battles to fight, more people trying to tear down what they'd built. But Alara had learned that the work was the point, not the destination, not the moment of final victory that never actually came. The work itself, the daily choice to show up and fight and build something better than what existed before. That was the game. And she'd learned to play it better than anyone expected. 6 months later, the grant program's expansion launched to widespread acclaim. 2 years after that, Alara testified before the city council about economic development policy. 3 years in, she was invited to speak at the same Obsidian Hall where everything had started. Not as an outsider crashing the party, but as a featured guest. She wore green velvet, the same dress from that first night, altered and updated, but fundamentally the same. A reminder of where she'd started and how far she'd come. Cassian attended the event, his first public appearance in Ashford since his self-imposed exile. He approached her during the reception, looking older and possibly wiser. "Miss Whitlock," he said formally. "Mr. Holt, I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For being right. For proving that the system I was defending was worth challenging. I've spent the last few years actually building something instead of just protecting what I inherited. It's harder than I thought, more satisfying, too." "Good for you." "I mean it." Cassian extended his hand. "No hard feelings?" Alara looked at the offered hand, remembering all the ways he'd tried to destroy her. The rumors, the articles, the tribunal, the months of fighting just to survive. She shook his hand. "No hard feelings, but I'm watching you." "Fair enough." He walked away, and Alara turned to find Darian standing nearby, having watched the entire exchange. "Think he means it?" she asked. Does it matter? He's not a threat either way. I suppose not. They moved through the crowd together, two people who'd built an empire on the ruins of everything that had tried to break them. Partners in the truest sense, equals who'd earned their position through intelligence, persistence, and refusal to accept the limits others tried to impose. The city of Ashford had changed in the years since Alara arrived. Not completely. Institutions that old never changed completely. But the cracks in the old order had widened into opportunities. People who would have been dismissed 5 years ago were starting businesses, joining conversations, building futures that didn't depend on family names or inherited advantage. It wasn't perfect. Progress never was. But it was real. And standing in that hall, looking at a room full of people who'd once sneered at her existence, Alara allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She'd done it. She'd survived, adapted, fought, and won. Not by becoming like the people who'd tried to destroy her, but by refusing to play by their rules. She'd changed the game by being brave enough to imagine a different one. And that, in the end, was worth every impossible fight it had taken to get there. Darian caught her eye from across the room and raised his glass in a silent toast. Alara returned the gesture. To survival, to partnership, to building something that mattered, to refusing to break, no matter how hard the world tried to make it happen. The chandelier above glittered like 1,000 trapped stars, just as ridiculous as it had been the first night. But it didn't intimidate her anymore. Nothing in this city intimidated her anymore. She'd earned her place here, fought for it, bled for it, built it from nothing into something that would outlast both her and everyone who doubted her. And she wasn't finished yet, not by a long shot. I